how do you understand and kind of deal with millennials better, because they're a big part of the workforce these days, and it's a common challenge that many folks have who own companies. So if you want to participate in that, or if you have maybe some stories about millennial stories that you'd like to share, maybe one of those things you can't make up because it's true, but it seems almost too hard to believe kind of thing. If you have some of those stories you want to share, we'd absolutely love to hear those as it relates to millennials. You can reach us here in the studio at 440-946-9468. Again, that's 440-946-WINT.
Who gives millennials a bad rap? It seems like they're getting a bad rap in the workplace.
They
One
do.
Of those very subjective.
It's rare that we mention that term to an owner. That term, and not even owners. Anybody who works for big corporations. If you mention that term, millennials, and people make that kind of sourpuss kind of face. It's rarely
it's
let me tell you how wonderful and great they are. Right.
Well, why is that? Are you going to touch on that?
Touch a little bit. Yeah. Well, I guess I wasn't. Is it that different than it was when all of a sudden, whether it be the boomers coming in or Gen X were coming in? I mean,
no,
there's always kind of a
generational divide. I think it depends on who's rapping the millennials. Certainly not the millennials. So it's all the other generations that
there are some of those
that are looking at that and saying, my God, look at these people. But they're preparing themselves for the times. So as we fast forward 50 years from now, they're going to, as we look back, be appropriate for the times.
Right.
Well,
there's always those generational divides. So let me touch. We talked about, again, the overall ages. So the millennials were born from 1982 to 2000. So ages are 17 to 35. And I was telling Jack during the break here, they're actually the biggest generation.
That's interesting.
There's 83.1 million of them, Jack. So they've passed the boomers now, or they're the biggest. And supposedly, they said this. I was a little bit skeptical that they control the most spending too, in terms of, I think it's like over $1 trillion in spending. But I think they control it, which I mean, again, because if many of them are living at home, they aren't doing so well. They're probably influencing mom and dad to spend money as opposed to spending
where they probably wouldn't before.
Right, but at the end of the day, they're influencing a lot of that stuff. So as we're going to break, I was talking about how they communicate.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So the top 3 ways that they communicate. Number 1 is texting. And we see that a lot, and that's I enjoy texting. I know you do too.
I think I would say that's probably most people's preferred way on a percentage
So that's number
basis.
1.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2 is email. Now, email is a caveat to this, Jack. It's the subject line. So if you have a poor or no subject line, chances are they aren't going to pay much attention to it, or it's confusing because they don't want to go through reams of information to see what the whole email's about. So they're going to look at that subject line and see what are you trying to communicate to me.
Okay.
All right. So that's number 2. So number 1 is texting. Number 2 is email, and number 3 is social media. Now this study is a couple years old. It's 2015 or 2014. So.
Oh, what are you talking about when you say social media?
Well, that's the thing. Well, they have a lot of different things that are being used. Things like Facebook that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. That's a bunch of old moms on Facebook, right? They've at least heard about Facebook, right?
I think I think that's very true. It's all family stuff for the most part. And old moms, right. That's right.
Well, they mentioned, like I mentioned before, the Gen Z, which is the I generation. Just to give you top social media sites, 54% were on Vine, 52% on Instagram, 34% on Twitter, 15% on Pinterest, and 11% on something called Periscope. So again, more than half see Facebook as being relevant, but 1 out of 3 never heard of LinkedIn. Now that's no surprise because these are folks who are 16 and under, right?
30% have never heard of LinkedIn.
That's the iGen. Okay, so it's
okay.
All right. So from a framing standpoint, just a couple of those things to kind of keep in mind when you're communicating with them. Again, so you probably noticed, Jack, that in that top 3 was not phone calls. All right, let's pick up the phone and call somebody was not in there. Face-to-face was not in there.
Boy.
All right? We got texting, I got email subject line, and I've got the social media stuff. So the whole idea of sitting across the table and talking to somebody, or God forbid, pick up a phone and talk to somebody. And I've talked to people who have teenagers or college age kids that I can call my kid and it'll go to voicemail. And I text them, and they answer right away.
Right.
So they're there. The device is there, but they aren't picking up to answer. It's almost like what's the purpose of having a phone, or the need to talk. That was part of what I talked to my 13-year-old about. He doesn't really talk on the phone either, but he wanted a phone, right? What do you need a phone for? You text or use social media stuff. You don't actually talk to people on the phone.
And that's just getting the gap is getting bigger there too.
Right.
So those skills which seem to be diminished really aren't diminished. Again, I'll say it. They're preparing for the future here. That's how people will basically be communicating. Or will phone calls, personal one-on-one, be rediscovered like often happens when you skip a generation? All of a sudden, Grandpa's way finds its way into mainstream.
Sure, the idea of pen pals. I remember I used to write letters all the time to my now wife. What was at the time was my girlfriend in college. I used to write letters. She has a box full of those letters, right? I mean, they're probably all yellow by now. Kind of they're dated with age and that. But the idea of writing a letter to somebody.
Amazing.
So whether it be in person or letters or phone calls, those are more old school ways of communicating.
Sure,
Not necessarily good or bad, but would certainly stand out and would can explain the awkward piece if you actually try to talk to a millennial on the phone or sit down across the table from them, while they're probably sitting there with a device like this, Jack, and they're looking, they're trying to talk to you and be on a device at the same time. Like, wait a minute, put the device aside. Here's how you sit and talk to somebody, right? It has to be taught to them.
Well, you can see the frustration, with the generation, with the older generation. That's where millennials again start to get a bad rap because of the way they are communicating, and they're breaking norms, not breaking norms, changing norms. It's the technology is there to do it that way, and they're coming up, up through the ranks, and it's much easier from their world. And quite frankly, things like texting seems to be the middle ground, at least from my informal look at the
be able
world.
to bridge the gap a little bit, right?
Yeah, because you can usually get pretty good response from all these generations, pretty much all of them.
Yeah, and it's easy enough to kind of do. The idea of using any kind of messaging software like that is pretty simple. You don't have to have a different app, whether it be like Instagram, or even Facebook or Snapchat, or any of those things where it's you don't have to learn a whole new thing. This is pretty simple. You put the thing here and you type in, a keyboard comes up, so it's again relatively straightforward. It's close to email. It's very similar to email, at least what it used to be. So from that standpoint, I think it helps to bridge those gaps. I've never personally been on Instagram or Vine.
I haven't
either.
either.
Those things either.
Vine, you're saying, is
Snapchat.
number one preferred social.
That's for iGen. Yeah, that's for those folks. That's for those kids that are 16 and under.
Okay.
So things like that, Snapchat and Instagram, those are all very popular with those folks. Now, how many of those are going to be around? Who knows? There'll probably be something else 3 years from now. That's part of what we've talked about. And that's part of the evolution of social media. But social media itself, as a communication tool, is here to stay. How they're communicating, what they're using, is going to change. The idea of MySpace, or that was probably one of the original social media things.
Way back.
Does that exist still? Probably somewhere. I mean, I don't know if are people still using that. Who knows? But people still using AOL for email. That's been around for 25 years.
Well,
now,
as we said, millennials' top age here, 35. Yeah, as you're getting older, wisdom isn't contained so much in elders as it is in Google. So that advantage of being older in many cases is disappearing.
Because you can Google everything. It's different hearing stories firsthand, though. You know that.
Yeah, that's right.
That's actually a common thing she touched on with iGens. Those are those kids who are probably 17 or 16 and under. They actually want to be mentored. They like hearing stories from the older generation. So there's not being totally lost. We had to break here right now, Jack. I want to touch on a couple things about ways to engage and attract and motivate some of these millennials when we come back. Got some good ideas there as well.
Okay, sounds